On a quiet morning in Windsor, a woman who had spent an entire year fighting for her life put on her coat, took her husband's hand, and walked back into the public eye. No cameras had caught her tears. No headlines had captured the nights she lay awake wondering if she would see her children grow up. But on that morning, none of that mattered anymore, because she was standing tall, she was smiling, and she was home. This is the story of how Catherine, Princess of Wales, and her husband Prince William turned the darkest chapter of their lives into their greatest triumph. Not through grand declarations, but through quiet, unshakable love. Few people outside the walls of Kensington Palace understood just how much the Prince and Princess of Wales had been carrying in the years leading up to this moment. To the world, they were the picture of royal stability. A young family raising 3 children, William preparing for a future he never asked for too early, and Catherine steadily becoming one of the most beloved figures in the monarchy's modern history. But behind the perfectly composed portraits and the practiced royal waves, the family was quietly enduring what William himself would later admit was the hardest period of his entire life. It began with King Charles. Not long after taking the throne, the king was diagnosed with cancer, a piece of news that shook the family to its core. William, who had already spent his life preparing to one day take on the weight of the crown, suddenly found himself stepping into a far more immediate role, supporting his father through treatment, while trying to shield his own children from the fear that came with watching a grandfather grow more tired with each passing month. It was a heavy enough burden for any son to carry. But then came a second blow, one that no one in the family could have prepared for. Catherine, too, was diagnosed with cancer. For a woman who had built her public identity around warmth, calm, and quiet strength, the diagnosis meant retreating from the very public she had spent over a decade connecting with. She stepped back from royal duties almost entirely, choosing instead to focus on the 2 things that mattered most in that moment: her health and her children. William, meanwhile, found himself pulled in every direction at once. A father to King Charles, a husband to Catherine, and a father himself to George, Charlotte, and Louis, 3 children who were far too young to fully understand why their parents suddenly seemed so tired, so protective, so present in ways they hadn't been before. There were engagements William quietly stepped away from. There were events Catherine was expected to attend that she simply could not. The world speculated, wrote theories, and filled the silence with noise. But inside the walls of their home, none of that speculation mattered. What mattered was getting through each day together, as a family, away from the noise of headlines and hashtags. William later described that period in words that stunned royal watchers around the world, calling it, quite simply, the hardest year of his life. It was a rare moment of honesty from a man trained since childhood to keep his emotions private, to never let the crown-in-waiting show weakness. But in speaking those words, William did something far more powerful than maintaining a polished image. He showed the public that even those born into unimaginable privilege are not immune to fear, grief, and the terrifying uncertainty of watching the people you love fight for their lives. And yet, through all of it, something remarkable was happening quietly in the background. Catherine was healing. Her recovery did not happen overnight, and it did not happen the way the public might have imagined, with a dramatic reveal or a triumphant return to the spotlight. Instead, it happened slowly, carefully, one small step at a time. She limited her public appearances strictly to what she could manage. She prioritized her children's routines, making sure that despite everything happening around them, George, Charlotte, and Louis still had a mother who tucked them into bed, who showed up to school events when she could, who made their home feel safe even when the world outside felt anything but. William, for his part, restructured much of his own public life to support her. He took on more of the family's public responsibilities, all while making it clear, through both actions and occasional words, that nothing mattered more to him than his wife's recovery and his children's stability. It was a side of the future king that the public had rarely seen so clearly, not the composed heir to the throne, but a husband and father putting everything else second. Then came the moment so many had been hoping for. Early in the following year, Catherine shared the news herself. She was in remission. The announcement, delivered in her own words rather than through a palace spokesperson, felt deeply personal, as though she wanted the public who had supported her to hear it directly from her, not filtered through official statements. It was a turning point, not just medically but emotionally, for the entire family. What followed was nothing short of remarkable. Catherine did not rush back into public life. True to the careful, deliberate way she had always approached her role, she eased back in gradually, choosing her appearances with intention rather than obligation. Her first major speech in over 2 years came at a workforce summit in London, and those who watched it noted something different in her voice, not just recovery, but a renewed sense of purpose. It was as though the experience, as painful as it had given her a clearer understanding of what she wanted her role in public life to mean. Her return to the world stage continued to build throughout the year. She stood beside William at major royal ceremonies, including a historic occasion at Canterbury Cathedral, where the two of them witnessed the enthronement of the first woman ever to serve as Archbishop of Canterbury in the role's 1400-year history. It was a fitting moment for Catherine to witness. A barrier broken, a new chapter written, not unlike the one she herself was living through. Perhaps most symbolically, Catherine made her long-awaited return to Royal Ascot, an event she had not attended since the winter before her diagnosis. For those who had followed her journey closely, the sight of her back in the royal carriage, seated beside William, smiling as she greeted the crowds and presented trophies to the day's winning jockeys, carried a weight far beyond a simple social outing. It was a public declaration, without a single word needing to be spoken, that she was truly back. Photographs from that day captured something the palace's careful statements never could: a young girl in the crowd handing Catherine a small bouquet of flowers, and the princess's face lighting up with a genuine, unguarded joy. It was a small moment, easily missed by anyone not paying close attention. But for those who understood everything the family had been through, it meant everything. Throughout this period of recovery and return, William's role evolved just as significantly, even if more quietly. As heir to the throne and a man now well into his 40s, the expectations placed upon him had shifted. He was no longer simply the dashing young prince the world had watched grow up. He was increasingly the future of the monarchy itself, carrying the weight of an institution that many believed needed to modernize to survive in a world where trust in traditional structures was fragile. William met that challenge in his own way, not through grand speeches about tradition, but through small, human gestures that connected him to ordinary people. He visited community pubs, sharing a laugh and a pint-pulling contest with a local business owner who had been recognized for bringing people together through simple acts of kindness, free tea, warm conversation, a place for the lonely to feel less alone. He sent personal letters of support to local sports clubs celebrating their own milestones. He spoke openly, when the moment called for it, about mental health, about grief, about the importance of community, topics that would have felt almost unthinkable for a royal to discuss so plainly a generation earlier. Together, William and Catherine began shaping what their future reign might actually look like, not as distant, untouchable figures, but as a couple determined to use their platform to shine a light on the people so often overlooked. Palace insiders spoke of plans to dedicate at least one engagement each month specifically to celebrating unsung community heroes across Britain. The volunteers, the small business owners, the quiet difference-makers who rarely receive recognition for the work they do. It was, in many ways, a reflection of everything the couple had learned during their hardest year. That real strength is often found not in grand titles, but in the quiet people who show up for others, day after day, without asking for anything in return. As the year continued, another milestone approached, one that carried deep symbolic weight for the couple's future. Come spring, William and Catherine were set to formally take up their roles as grantors of royal warrants, a responsibility passed down with the blessing of King Charles himself. It was a small but meaningful step in their gradual transition toward the roles they would one day hold as king and queen, proof that despite everything the family had endured, the future was moving forward, steadily and with purpose. Their children, too, were growing up in the midst of all this change. George, now a teenager, stood on the edge of new responsibilities of his own, the reality of his future role slowly becoming clearer with each passing year. Charlotte and Louis, still younger, continued to bring moments of lightness and laughter into a family that had learned, the hard way, not to take those moments for granted. The family's move to a larger home in Windsor Great Park marked not just a change of address, but a symbolic fresh start, a home built not around royal formality, but around the everyday rhythms of family life. Catherine herself spoke warmly about the simple joys of planning the new house, of choosing colors and layouts with her children in mind, a small but telling sign of just how much she had reclaimed her sense of normalcy. On Father's Day, in a gesture that captured the family's warmth better than any official portrait ever could, Catherine shared a tender photograph of William with their daughter Charlotte, taken during that year's Trooping the Color celebrations. The caption, simple and heartfelt, thanked him for being, in her words, the best father in the world. It was a small, private moment made public, not for image, not for headlines, but simply because it was true, and because after everything they had been through, sharing that truth felt right. Royal commentators, watching from the outside, began to describe Catherine as nothing less than essential to the monarchy's future, a figure whose popularity, warmth, and quiet influence had only grown stronger through adversity. Her ability to connect with people, whether through her fashion choices that captivated designers and everyday admirers alike, or through her understated but powerful public appearances, made her, in the words of those who study the royal family closely, one of the most important figures the institution had. And William, standing beside her, was no longer simply the prince waiting his turn. He had become, through fire and difficulty, a man ready to lead, not because tradition demanded it, but because he had proven, through the hardest years of his life, that he could hold his family together when it mattered most. What made this story remarkable was never really about titles, ceremonies, or the formalities of royal life. It was about two people who had faced the possibility of losing everything that truly mattered to them, and who came out the other side not broken, but stronger, more grounded, more connected to the people they served, and more certain than ever of what really mattered. Catherine's recovery was not just a medical victory. It was a testament to resilience, to the quiet strength of a mother determined to be there for her children, and to a marriage that had weathered fear and uncertainty without losing its warmth. For William, the experience reshaped not just how he saw his future role, but how he understood leadership itself. He had learned, in the most painful way possible, that true strength was not about appearing untouchable. It was about showing up, staying present, and choosing love and family over every external expectation placed upon him. The crown he would one day wear suddenly felt less like a symbol of distant power, and more like a responsibility he now understood on a deeply human level, because he had lived through what it meant to nearly lose the people that responsibility was meant to protect. As the year moved forward, with more engagements planned, more milestones ahead, and a family finally finding its footing again after years of uncertainty, one truth stood out above everything else. The greatest success Catherine and William had achieved was not measured in ceremonies, titles, or headlines. It was measured in the ordinary, priceless moments they had fought so hard to protect: bedtime stories with their children, quiet mornings in their new home, a hand held tightly through the darkest days, and the simple, powerful fact that they had made it through together. And as Catherine stepped forward once more into public life, flowers in hand, smiling beside the husband who had never once let go of her through it all, it became clear to everyone watching that this was not just a royal comeback. It was a love story written not in fairy tales, but in resilience, the kind of story that reminds the world that even those born into palaces are, at their core, simply human beings, fighting the same battles, cherishing the same small joys, and finding their greatest victories not in power, but in each other.